It was a cold, foggy night when Officer Ryan Carter received a distress call from the outskirts of town. The voice on the radio was frantic. A local had reported hearing screams coming from the long-abandoned Blackwood Asylum, a place infamous for its dark history. The asylum had been closed for over 30 years after a series of mysterious deaths, all unsolved. Locals avoided the area, claiming the place was cursed, but Carter wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. He chalked up the reports to teenagers looking for a thrill. However, protocol was protocol. Accompanied by his partner, Officer Elena Diaz, Carter drove to the asylum. The fog grew thicker as they approached, swallowing the headlights of their patrol car. The massive, decaying building loomed in the darkness, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring back at them. "This place gives me the creeps," Elena muttered, gripping her flashlight tightly. "Just a building," Carter replied, though his voice wavered. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of mildew and decay. Their footsteps echoed eerily down the long, empty corridors. The floor was littered with old patient files, broken furniture, and rusted equipment. As they moved deeper into the asylum, they heard it. A faint, blood-curdling scream that seemed to come from the upper floors. Carter and Elena exchanged a look before heading upstairs, their flashlights cutting through the suffocating darkness. On the second floor, they found a room with its door slightly ajar. Inside was an old record player, its needle scratching against a vinyl record, spinning endlessly, but there was no one in sight. "That's odd," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the scratching sound. Suddenly the door slammed shut behind them. Carter rushed to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Elena's flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, they saw a shadow dart across the room. "Who's there?" Carter demanded, his hand on his holstered weapon. No response. As they struggled to open the door, a series of old, faded photographs fell from a nearby shelf. Carter picked one up. It showed a group of patients and staff from decades ago. But what caught his eye was a single figure standing in the background, a man with hollow eyes and an unnerving smile. "That's Dr. Grayson," Elena said, her voice trembling. "He was the head of this place, and the rumors about him were horrifying." According to the asylum's records, Dr. Grayson had been accused of conducting inhumane experiments on the patients. After the asylum closed, he vanished without a trace. Some believed he never left. The door suddenly flew open, and the two officers stumbled back into the hallway. The screams grew louder, leading them down another corridor. This time, they found a cell door slightly ajar. Inside was a single chair with restraints, and scrawled across the walls were the words, "Help me." The room grew unbearably cold, and their breath became visible in the air. Elena froze, staring at the chair. "Carter, look." A faint figure began to materialize. First just a shadow, then the outline of a man. It was the same hollow-eyed figure from the photograph. The entity spoke, its voice distorted and filled with anguish. "You shouldn't have come here." Before Carter could react, the figure lunged toward him, and everything went black. When Carter woke up, he was lying outside the asylum with Elena beside him. Their patrol car was gone, and their radios were dead. Confused and shaken, they walked back to town. The next morning, they reported their findings to the chief. But when they returned to the asylum with a backup team, the building was completely sealed. Boards nailed over the doors and windows, as if it had been abandoned for decades. Even stranger, their colleagues claimed the Blackwood Asylum had been demolished years ago. Carter and Elena never spoke of the incident again, but they both knew the truth. Something evil still lingered in that place, waiting for its next visitor. And every so often, a new distress call comes through about screams from the asylum, always on a foggy night. Officer Ryan Carter couldn't sleep. Weeks had passed since the terrifying events at Blackwood Asylum, but the memories wouldn't leave him. The screams, the ghostly figure, the vanishing asylum, it all felt too real to dismiss. What troubled him most was the photograph he had picked up inside, showing Dr. Grayson. He remembered stuffing it into his jacket pocket before blacking out. Now, as he held the photo in his hands under the dim light of his living room, he noticed something chilling. The shadowy figure of Dr. Grayson seemed more defined than before, as if it had been captured in the act of moving. His phone buzzed, breaking the tense silence. It was Elena. "Ryan, it's happening again. Another call about screams from Blackwood." His blood ran cold. Reluctantly, Carter and Elena agreed to investigate. This time, they brought backup. 2 rookie officers, Sam and Julia, who were eager but skeptical of the asylum's legend. As the 4 approached the site, they were shocked to find the asylum standing tall once again, just as it had on their first visit. "Okay, this is impossible," Sam said, staring at the looming structure. "Didn't you say this place was sealed or demolished?" "It was," Elena whispered. The group entered cautiously. The air inside was even heavier than before, and the silence was deafening. Carter's flashlight flickered, and he thought he saw a figure dart down the hallway. "Stay together," he instructed, his voice firm. As they explored, the atmosphere grew oppressive. Doors creaked open on their own, and faint whispers echoed through the halls, though no one was visible. Julia's face turned pale. "Do you hear that?" she asked, trembling. "Hear what?" Sam replied, looking around nervously. "The voices, they're calling my name." The group froze. "Elena," Carter whispered, "did you hear anything?" She shook her head, but her hand hovered over her weapon. Suddenly, Julia screamed and pointed down the hallway. "There, someone's watching us." The flashlight beams landed on a shadowy figure at the end of the corridor. It didn't move, but its presence felt suffocating. "Show yourself," Carter yelled, but the figure vanished. The screams returned, louder this time, leading them to a staircase that descended into the basement. Despite their fear, the group moved down, the rookies following reluctantly. The basement was worse than they imagined. Rusted surgical tools lay scattered on blood-stained tables, and rows of cells lined the walls. Inside the cells were faded scratches, as if someone or something had tried desperately to escape. Elena found an old ledger on a desk. The pages detailed Dr. Grayson's experiments, which involved trapping patient souls to study death. One entry stood out: Patient 27. Subject shows signs of resisting the transfer. Uncooperative. Solution: permanent confinement. Before anyone could comment, the room plunged into darkness. A low growl echoed around them, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. The flashlights flickered back to life, revealing Dr. Grayson standing just feet away, his hollow eyes locked onto the group. His figure was more solid now, his presence undeniably real. "Why, did you come back?" he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. Before they could react, the door slammed shut, and the room filled with a deafening roar. The entity lunged toward Julia, who was frozen in terror. Carter fired his weapon, but the bullets passed straight through the figure. "Run!" he shouted. The group scattered, desperately trying to find an exit. Elena and Carter stuck together, while the rookies were separated in the chaos. Carter and Elena managed to find their way back to the first floor, but Sam and Julia were nowhere to be seen. "We have to go back for them," Elena said, her voice shaky but determined. Before Carter could respond, the asylum itself seemed to shift. The walls groaned and the corridors twisted, creating a maze. "Ryan, look!" Elena pointed to a nearby wall. A shadowy handprint appeared, slowly dragging itself across the surface, leaving a trail of black ichor. "They're alive," Carter said, "but we're running out of time." As they retraced their steps, they stumbled upon a room they hadn't seen before. Inside were rows of jars, each containing a faint, glowing light. "These are souls," Elena whispered. One jar was shattered, its contents gone. Beneath it was a label, Patient 27. A horrifying realization hit Carter. The screams, they're the trapped souls. The sound of footsteps behind them made them turn. Julia staggered into the room, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "Sam, he's gone," she choked out. "Something took him." Before they could process her words, the room filled with an ear-piercing shriek. The jars began to shake violently, their glow intensifying. Dr. Grayson appeared again, his face twisted in rage. "You should never have come back." The group fled, running blindly through the ever-shifting halls. They finally found an exit, bursting out into the cold night air. But as they turned back to look, they realized the asylum was gone, vanished without a trace. Carter, Elena, and Julia returned to the station, shaken and unsure of what to report. Sam was officially listed as missing, but they all knew the truth. He was now one of Blackwood's many victims. That night, Carter found the photograph on his desk. This time, there were 4 figures standing behind Dr. Grayson. One of them was Sam. Officer Ryan Carter sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the photograph that had inexplicably reappeared on his desk. The addition of Sam to the shadowy figures behind Dr. Grayson sent chills down his spine. Each face in the photo seemed alive, their hollow eyes boring into him, silently accusing. He couldn't shake the feeling that the asylum, and whatever malevolent force controlled it, wasn't finished with him yet. As if to confirm his fears, his phone buzzed. It was Elena. "Ryan, we've got another problem," she said, her voice tense. "Julia's missing." "What do you mean?" he demanded. "She didn't show up for her shift. I went to her place, her door was wide open, and..." Elena hesitated. "I found this." She sent him a picture. It was another photograph of Dr. Grayson and the asylum. This time, Julia's face was in the background, faint but unmistakable. Carter and Elena met at the station, their unease palpable. They reviewed every piece of evidence they had: Julia's phone, her last known location, and the reports from their first visit to Blackwood. But nothing could explain how Julia had disappeared without a trace. "Ryan, I don't think this is over," Elena said, her voice trembling. "Whatever's happening, it's targeting us. First Sam, now Julia. What if we're next?" Carter didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out the original photograph from his pocket. "Elena, look at this." The photograph had changed again. This time, Carter and Elena's faint silhouettes were visible, standing among the other trapped souls. Desperate for answers, they decided to seek out someone who might know more. After hours of research, they found an old paranormal investigator named Dr. Malcolm Hensley, who had written extensively about haunted locations, including Blackwood Asylum. When they arrived at his secluded home, Dr. Hensley greeted them with wary eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, ushering them inside. Hensley listened intently as they recounted their experiences. When they showed him the photographs, his face grew pale. "This is worse than I thought," he muttered. Dr. Grayson wasn't just a madman. He was a conduit, someone who could bridge the gap between life and death. He trapped souls in that asylum to harness their energy, and it seems his reach hasn't diminished, even in death. "So how do we stop him?" Carter asked, his frustration evident. "You can't," Hensley replied gravely. "Not unless you sever his connection to this world, and that means returning to the asylum." That night, Carter and Elena prepared for what they hoped would be their final trip to Blackwood. Armed with flashlights, recording equipment, and a few protective talismans provided by Hensley, they drove back to the site. To their shock, the asylum was once again standing, its dark silhouette outlined against the moonlit sky. "Every time I see this place, it feels more alive," Elena muttered, clutching her flashlight. As they stepped inside, the air felt heavier than before, almost as if the building was aware of their presence. The whispers began almost immediately, soft at first, but growing louder with each step they took. "Help! Us!" The voices were distinct now. Men, women, children, all pleading for release. The whispers guided them back to the basement, where they had found the jars of souls. This time, the room was filled with a dim, otherworldly glow. The jars were glowing brighter, and in the center of the room stood Dr. Grayson, more solid and menacing than ever. "You shouldn't have returned," he hissed, his voice echoing unnaturally. Carter stepped forward, holding the talisman tightly. "We're here to end this." Dr. Grayson laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the walls. "You think you can defeat me? I am eternal. This asylum is mine, and so are all who enter." The room shook violently as Grayson raised his hands. Shadows poured out from the walls, taking shape and circling Carter and Elena. Hensley had given them a set of instructions: to recite an incantation that would break Grayson's hold on the trapped souls. Elena began chanting, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. The shadows screeched in agony, and Grayson's form flickered, as if struggling to maintain its shape. "Stop!" he bellowed, lunging toward Elena. Carter stepped in front of her, firing his weapon instinctively. Though the bullets didn't harm Grayson, they seemed to disrupt his focus. "Keep going," Carter yelled. As Elena continued the chant, the jars began to shatter one by one. With each soul released, Grayson grew weaker, his figure becoming more transparent. The last jar shattered with a deafening crack, and the room was consumed by a blinding light. When it faded, Grayson was gone, and the oppressive energy that had filled the asylum dissipated. Carter and Elena stumbled out of the building, exhausted but relieved. Behind them, the asylum began to crumble, its walls collapsing in on themselves, until there was nothing left but rubble. They stood in silence, watching as the fog lifted and the first rays of dawn broke through the darkness. Back at the station, Carter and Elena filed their report, though they knew no one would believe it. Julia and Sam remained missing, their fates a grim reminder of the asylum's horrors. Weeks later, Carter received one final photograph in the mail. It was a picture of the asylum, now just a pile of ruins. In the corner of the image, faint but unmistakable, was the figure of Dr. Grayson, his hollow eyes still watching.